All right, Jason here from Real Property Management. And today we're going to pick up on an educational piece that I have found when I started my real estate career wasn't there. You know, a lot of people teach you about how to sell a property, the paperwork to go down, the lawyers that are involved, and then leases just kind of naturally come up as part of the business. You know, you work with investors, want you to find tenants, manage problems, but nobody ever taught you how to do those things. And when you started doing them a little bit, you find out they're not quite like a sale. You can't take those same principles of, highest and best offer gets the property. I just need to do my inspections to cover myself. Nobody else is doing the background checks now, and it's come around to me. And sort of what do we do next? So we started this series here to educate people a little bit about what happens in residential tenancies in Ontario. And today we're going to talk about sort of what happens in a tenancy, the cycle that it goes through, how it starts, how it begins, what you should do in the middle, and how they really end, so people have a basic understanding about what happens here. Because we find a lot of people fall apart on these little principles, and it just is a rolling ball of problems the farther down the road you get. So we're going to talk today, not about this on the screen here, but this gives you a good idea about what happens with properties. I'm sure you're familiar with, I've got a place, I need to rent it. So we start advertising for tenants. I put some ads up. People start calling me. I start qualifying them. We go out and do some showings. We get them to submit an application. We do the screening process. We generate a lease. We do the move-in. And then we're in this little cycle here of, I take care of the rent collection. We do the management. We do the maintenance and the inspections. And that's it. Well, how do you get out of this circle? How does a tenant leave? When does a lease end? And those are kind of the little fundamentals that we're going to tear apart today and go over. So any lease really has three different parts. You got the beginning, the middle, and the end. And we're going to go over sort of what you should do in these three steps so you have a good idea. So when any lease starts, you're going to want to make sure that you use the Ontario government form for the standard lease that came out. I'm going to tell you as a best practice, you're always going to want to prorate the rent to the first. Anytime you do a mid-month move-in, everybody messes up all of those dates. If you do your lease starting on the 14th of the month, then your rent's due on the 14th of every month going forward. Your tenant notices for ending a lease would be on the 13th of the month. When you go to send your rent increases, you're increasing it as the 14th of the month. And everybody always gets that mixed up. So always prorate your rents from when they start to the next full month. Make your life simpler. When you start a new lease, you're able to collect the last month's rent from the tenant, and you are able to collect a reasonable, refundable key deposit. And normally this reasonable part is in reference to the cost of getting the keys replaced. You're going to want to make sure that you have set up utility accounts and verified them for the tenants, because if you have not before they move in, you could play a little ping pong game with the different court systems. And what do I mean by this? I mean, you file an application, you go to the landlord and tenant board, and they'll say, utilities are not part of rent, we're not dealing with them. Okay, you take it a step further. You go to small claims court. Small claims court has ruled that utilities are rent, as it is the jurisdiction of the Residential Tenancies Act. And they will kick it back to the other court saying, no, it's their problem. And you're stuck in between, playing between these two court systems. And really, there's no answer right now, and there's no easy way to win. And the best way you can win is just by protecting yourself, by making sure these accounts are set up and verified before they move in. And so what I mean by verified, pick up the phone and call. Don't take someone at their word that, yeah, I've set up a hydro account. Yeah, I've set up a gas account. Don't worry about it. Now, these things need to be in place for you to be protected. Same thing with your tenant's insurance. Because remember, as a landlord, your only recourse is eviction through the landlord and tenant board. And then lastly, once all these things are done, you can give over the keys. In the middle of a lease here is often where we find people break down in some of the most crucial parts. It's not just 12 months of collecting rent. Most deals when they happen, tenants pay first and last month's rent, and then they give you 10 post-dated checks in between. And so we're going to go through this example here, taking it back to January 1st just to make it simple. So you'll see here at the top, we've got our lease started, and you should have already had January's rent. Then we're going to have several months of February through August of just collect the rent. Take it easy, come on in. And then we hit September here. It's the first time you really have to do something differently. Because in September, you're allowed to increase the rent for the next year. There's only a certain way you can do it though, so pay attention, we'll go over that. You've then got 2 months of rent collection, and then you hit December. And this is where I find a lot of agreements fall down. And it's really just miseducation or lack thereof. Tenants don't know what's supposed to happen. Landlords aren't sure either. And more often than not, I see people like, well, I've paid my last month's rent. You use it for December. And that only works if somebody is leaving the property at the end of the month. So you should always expect to collect that December rent unless you've got an eviction order or someone's given notice. So that last month's rent stays with the tenancy, with the lease. And as you can see here, January 1 kicks around. You need to collect new rent on the increased amount, and you keep that last month's rent until somebody is leaving the property. So here we talk about how does a lease end? And really, leases don't end in Ontario. I've love to talk to people about how leases automatically go month to month after you've assigned an initial term. And they don't end unless you get notice from the tenant, you evict them, or you go through a no-fault eviction. And the one we don't really cover here is death. Leases automatically end 30 days after a tenant dies. But a lot of people are like, well, I understand what an eviction is. I understand when a tenant gives me notice. But what's a no-fault eviction? And it's almost like the name applies. Nobody's done anything wrong, but the tenancy still needs to come to an end. So a no-fault eviction could be an owner's moving into a property, a buyer's moving into the property, you're converting it to a different use, undergoing major renovations. So there are different ways that a lease can end. And the one thing I love to touch on, just sort of our last topic here, is there's only one way you're able to increase the rent to the landlord-tenant board, and that's using the proper forms. So if you're going to increase the rent by the guidelines, use a N1 application. If you're going to do it for a property that's exempt to the guidelines, use an N2. Both of these require 90 days notice, and that's how long the tenant has to have the paperwork for. So that doesn't mean mail it on day 93, because the law also stipulates certain things like you have to allow 5 days for mailing. So make sure you send it early, send it in time. And in my example, we're doing it 120 days in advance. So there's no way somebody could say that you missed the window and your rent increase is now invalid. So stay tuned. As we talked about, we're going to be continuing these educational pieces. And as always, if you ever have any questions or want to reach out, let us know. Have a good one.